everybody. Good evening. Good to see you guys. Hey, TJ, how are you? How are you doing this evening? I decided to stream from both platforms this evening because I wanted to to bring some informational stuff. Um, it was kind of deep, and I was like strolling through the social media today, and I happened to see Attorney Bonjean, Jennifer Bonjean's post, and I thought it was interesting, and I wanted to show you guys some of the stuff that I dug up in regards to the post. And I'm going to share the post first with you, and then I'm going to share the stories of the two particular situations she's talking about. One is an actual case, and the other one is an article that was written in the Atlantic paper. And I'm going to share first the case first, which is very familiar to me because I remember it back in the 80s. I was very, very young, but I remember some parts of it because it was like a big frenzy all over the world. In the United States at the time. And I wanted to share some of that information with you. Guys, can y'all block those weird things that's coming through on our page? So I'm going to go ahead and share first the post from Attorney Jennifer Bonjean. I always like to say it both ways. And then I'm going to go ahead and play the article for you guys. First, she says, history prequels. Anyone remember the McMartin case and the child abuse hysteria of the 80s and the great fake child sex trafficking epidemic in the Atlantic? So what I did is I went and got the article as well as the case. So I'm going to first play the McMartin case. I'm going to first play the information that I got. No, let me play the video first. I'm not going to show the video. I'm just going to play the audio of the video while you guys watch this part. Just so I'm keep this up, and then I'm just going to show you play the audio of the case. It's called the McMartin case. It was a case with alleged sex child abuse, and they were charged with they had hundreds of counts of child abuse. But I'm gonna play what happened, and I've got my trusty. Gotta play this first. Hold on. I'm gonna have my thing play it for you guys. Hold on. It's gonna start from the beginning. No, let me play the video first, and then I'm gonna play. Then I'm gonna play the what do you call it? The read out loud. Okay, first I'm going to do the video. I'm not going to show the video. I'm just going to play the audio of the video. And those who wants to look at it later on, I'll give you the title of it. All right, hold on.
In what may become one of the biggest child molesting cases ever on record, 7 nursery school teachers were arraigned today on more than 100 counts of child molestation.
The accused include the preschool owner, 76-year-old Virginia McMartin, her daughter, and 2 grandchildren.
Finding out just what happened to the McMartin preschoolers in Manhattan Beach, California, would spark a national media obsession.
A case which has shocked much of Southern California and caused a lot of parents to worry about the safety of their children,
setting off a panic around the country.
In alarming numbers, preschoolers have been exploited.
Could it be your child?
The media blitz demonstrated unstinting belief that this had happened.
It was sensational, and
lurid, and seem to always be expanding.
1,400 children in this community have been ritualistically abused.
But were they? Decades later, while the McMartin case has been largely forgotten, its impact lives on.
The McMartin preschool in Manhattan Beach, as it looked when we photographed it discreetly just 3 weeks ago.
Local reporter Wayne Satz of KABC in Los Angeles broke the story.
It started out here in Manhattan Beach looking like an isolated incident. One mother noticed that her young son was having nightmares and difficulty sitting down.
Teachers at this prominent Southern California preschool were accused of sexually molesting their young students.
Authorities now believe that at least 60 young children were victimized, and that the ultimate number could well be much greater.
Fueled by unskeptical press reports, the charges mounted on the evening news.
Those children, some of them as young as 2 years old, were photographed by the suspects.
Kiddie porn was the primary purpose for the alleged sexual abuse of children,
becoming more and more bizarre.
Some children allege that a living creature was sacrificed on the church's altar.
The truth about Satanism is they truly do use blood, and they mix it with urine, and then they also use the real meat, the real flesh. This is what makes Satanism true. And this is what 1,200 molested kids in the city of Manhattan Beach have told the sheriff's department.
Most of the allegations had been made here at Children's Institute International, CII, a child abuse prevention center. At the request of prosecutors, CII social worker Kee McFarlane and her team had been videotaping interviews with the preschoolers.
Using puppets to encourage the children to reveal what happened, the therapists were able to unlock the horrible secrets of the McMartin school.
Virginia McMartin, her daughter, 2 grandchildren, and 3 other teachers were ultimately indicted on more than 300 counts of molestation.
2 South Bay preschools.
It wasn't long before accusations of abuse were being reported at 7 other daycare centers in LA County alone.
Investigators were at the Hickory Preschool in Torrance earlier today.
And then fear spread across the country, eventually targeting scores of daycare centers. But the story that initially fed the panic was not all it seemed. In the summer of 1983, a 39-year-old mother called the Manhattan Beach Police Department and accused McMartin teacher Raymond Bucky of molesting her 2.5-year-old son.
In the DA's office, all kinds of doubts developed, particularly about the fact that the mother of the first complaining child was psychotic, but they just kept on going. It was like the Titanic. It was like a roller coaster or a ship that just was out of control and couldn't stop.
The police released Bucky for lack of evidence. But then they sent out this letter to some 200 families, instructing them to question their children about sodomy, oral sex, and fondling.
What happens then?
Don't that sound familiar? They're soliciting victims. They sent a letter out to the parents soliciting victims. After the first, they found there was not enough evidence to keep Mr. Bucky in jail. So what they do is they decide to solicit victims.
And is the parents start to talk to their kids, and then they start to talk to each other, and then they start to compare notes, and pretty soon emotionally involved parents are engaging in leading and suggestive questioning of their child.
Kenneth Lanning worked with the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit and consulted on the McMartin investigation.
Once these cases are contaminated, it's almost impossible to know with any degree of certainty what actually happened.
But the therapists at CII believed they knew what had happened. Based on their videotaped interviews, they said that more than 90% of the 400 preschoolers they talked to reported signs of sexual abuse.
Mr. Parrott, can you help Susie show us what happened to her?
The courts immediately sealed CII's interviews with the McMartin children. But the CII therapists shared demonstration videos like this one with the press and discussed their findings on television.
We have heard it 100 times or more from children, the same things, the same games, the same descriptions.
I can't say that I ever saw a videotape where kids said this happened to me. Never of their own account spun.
You hear that, right? They never saw the video of a kid saying it to them, but they went to the press to say, to make these accusations, and they went and got public opinion. Sounds familiar?
Spontaneously.
The interviews are upsetting to read because essentially what happened is the therapist unintentionally coerced the children into fabricating stories of abuse.
Richard Beck wasn't even born when the McMartin story first broke in 1984. Fascinated by the panic that spread across the country, he has been researching and writing a book on the case for the last 2 years.
You have interviews that will start off with a therapist asking a child whether they had ever played any naked games. At McMartin, this was a huge topic, was naked games. And the children initially say no. The therapist, though, didn't accept those answers. So then they repeat the question. And then they repeat it again. Eventually, the children realize that their interview is never going to be allowed to end until they start giving the interviewer the kind of answer that she wants to hear.
It was obvious in the interviews that all kinds of techniques were highly suggestible, highly pressuring, and is capable of creating false memories of abuse in children, often permanent memories.
Key McFarlane is no longer with CII. She declined our request for an interview. Dr. Stephen Ambrose has been working with children for more than 25 years and was at CII during the McMartin interviews.
I think our therapists, in many respects, started out being very careful about that back then, but as they became more persuaded that something had happened, there probably were some leading questions.
Dr. Ambrose says the McMartin case came about just as a new understanding of child sexual abuse was emerging.
It happened right at the time in the sort of the history of the field when we were just beginning to come to terms with the fact that child sexual abuse was a real phenomenon.
Wake up, America. This is your wake-up call.
People don't want to believe that young children have been molested. They much prefer to believe that it's not true.
We believe the children because once upon a time, we were the children, and nobody believed us.
But that belief was sorely tested as investigators searched for physical evidence to back up what the children were saying.
No pornography that could be linked to the abuse that the children were describing has ever been found.
There should have been little animal carcasses. There should have been bodily fluids all over the preschool. They didn't have any of that.
And what about those early claims of satanic abuse?
There certainly have been mentally ill people who have gone out and killed people, quote, in the name of Satan. But there's never been any proof that there was any kind of satanic ritual abuse or satanic cult activity in a daycare center.
When I first got involved in these cases, I'll be very honest with you, I tended to believe that this was going on. But eventually, the number of cases just kept growing and growing and growing. And at some point, I came to the realization, this many people can't be doing this to this many victims for this long and not leaving any corroborative evidence behind. It just doesn't work that way.
18 months after the McMartin investigation began, the case took a dramatic turn.
What we're left with at this point is that for 5 of the 7 defendants in the McMartin case, the evidence is so slim that it does not go beyond the mere accusation.
So in April of 1987, nearly 4 years after the first accusation was made, the case against the 2 remaining McMartin defendants, Raymond Buckey and his mother Peggy McMartin Buckey, finally went to trial. In court, medical evidence supporting the prosecution's case couldn't be established with any certainty, and although hundreds of children had been interviewed, in the end, only 9 testified.
Y'all hear that, right? The medical could not be, I guess, proven. So doesn't that sound like Robert's situation where the doctor, that there was a negative testing, but then the doctor claims that he gave the medication to Robert for herpes? Doesn't that sound a little bit like the case with Robert?
extremely lengthy cross-examination of children at the preliminary hearing, some parents decided that they would refuse to let their children participate any further.
Through it all, the Buckys remain steadfast about their innocence.
True, and I'm very nervous. I probably have said some things that are not quite correct, and I'll grant it and I'll admit that.
Including Mr. Bucky, whether or not you molested children in this case?
No, Mr. Wood, I know that I did not molest children ever in my life.
The trial lasted nearly 3 years, and in January of 1990,
we, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the very defendants not guilty.
The children were never allowed to say in their own words what happened to them, and to me that was crucial.
the jury could not agree on 13 counts against Raymond Bucky, so 6 months later, prosecutors brought him back to court. Once again, the jury was deadlocked.
Therefore, there's legal necessity to declare a mistrial.
And with that declaration, one of the longest, most expensive criminal trials in U.S. history finally came to an end.
I'm glad it's over.
McMartin lead prosecutor Lael Rubin says that while she wishes the outcome had been different, the case brought about important changes.
Very young children who may or may not have been sexually abused have certainly been traumatized by endless hours of relentless examination.
Among them, a new understanding on the best way to interview children.
Who should do it, who should be present, how all of that should occur and be videotaped. So it really created a dialogue of examining the best way to talk to children who might be victims of crimes.
Nowadays, as opposed to back when the McMartin case took place, there's a very clear protocol about how to interview kids, and there's a very strong focus on being avoiding leading questions of any kind. There's much more care taken to make sure that whatever the results are, they will stand up in court.
When the trial ended, the McMartin preschool was demolished. A laundry and dry cleaning store now sits in its place. After his acquittal, Raymond Bucky made a few television appearances, like this one on The Larry King Show.
What do you want to do in your life? I want to be left alone. I've seen what the news media can do to people in a crowded situation, and I don't want to be in LA, and I want to be left alone. Simple life.
For Raymond Bucky's defense attorney, Danny Davis, the impact of the McMartin case should never be forgotten.
It brings into focus that our American culture can do harm to our children in the next generation, to win at all costs, to have a great publicity run, to jump the ratings and make it for a day. Those are all adult aspirations at the sacrifice of children.
Okay, that's part the case itself. Now I'm gonna go ahead and play the actual information regarding the case. Just hold on a second. I'm gonna play it. Sorry. All right, I'm gonna go here. All right, here we go. I'm going to do my read out loud. So I don't have to read it. It can read it for you.
The McMartin preschool trial was a daycare sexual abuse case in the 1980s, prosecuted by the Los Angeles District Attorney Ira Reiner. Members of the McMartin family, who operated a preschool in Manhattan Beach, California, were charged with hundreds of acts of sexual abuse of children in their care. Accusations were made in 1983. Arrests in the pretrial investigation took place from 1984 to 1987, and trials ran from 1987 to 1990. The case lasted 7 years but resulted in no convictions, and all charges were dropped in 1990. By the case's end, it had become the longest and most expensive in American history. The case was part of daycare sex abuse hysteria, a moral panic over alleged satanic ritual abuses the 1980s and early 1990s. In 1983, Judy Johnson, mother of one of the Manhattan Beach, California, preschool's young students, reported to the police that her son had been sodomized by her estranged husband and McMartin teacher Ray Buckey. Ray Buckey was the grandson of school founder Virginia McMartin and son of administrator Peggy McMartin Buckey. Johnson's belief that her son had been abused began when her son had painful bowel movements. What happened next is still disputed. Some sources state that at that time, Johnson's son denied her suggestion that his preschool teachers had molested him, whereas others say he confirmed the abuse. In addition, Johnson also made several more accusations, including that people at the daycare had sexual encounters with animals, that Peggy drilled a child under the arms and Ray flew in the air. Ray Buckey was questioned, but was not prosecuted due to lack of evidence. The police then sent a form letter to about 200 parents of students at the McMartin school, stating that their children might have been abused, and asking the parents to question their children. The text of the letter read: September 8, 1983. Dear parent, this department is conducting a criminal investigation involving child molestation, 288 PC. Ray Buckey, an employee of Virginia McMartin's preschool, was arrested September 7, 1983 by this department. The following procedure is obviously an unpleasant one, but to protect the rights of your children as well as the rights of the accused, this inquiry is necessary for a complete investigation. Records indicate that your child has been or is currently a student at the preschool. We are asking your assistance in this continuing investigation. Please question your child to see if he or she has been a witness to any crime or if he or she has been a victim. Our investigation indicates that possible criminal acts include oral sex, fondling of genitals, buttock or chest area, and sodomy, possibly committed under the pretense of taking the child's temperature. Also, photos may have been taken of children without their clothing. Any information from your child regarding having ever observed Ray Buckey to leave a classroom alone with a child during any nap period, or if they have ever observed Ray Buckey tie up a child, is important. Please complete the enclosed information form and return it to this department in the enclosed stamped return envelope as soon as possible. We will contact you if circumstances dictate same. We ask you to please keep this investigation strictly confidential because of the nature of the charges and the highly emotional effect it could have on our community. Please do not discuss this investigation with anyone outside your immediate family. Do not contact or discuss the investigation with Raymond Buckey, any member of the accused defendant's family, or employees connected with the McMartin preschool. There is no evidence to indicate that the management of Virginia McMartin's preschool had any knowledge of this situation, and no detrimental information concerning the operation of the school has been discovered during this investigation. Also, no other employee in the school is under investigation for any criminal act. Johnson was diagnosed with and hospitalized for acute paranoid schizophrenia, and in 1986 was found dead in her home from complications of chronic alcoholism before the preliminary hearing concluded.
Wow.
Several hundred children were then interviewed by the Children's Institute International, CII, a Los Angeles-based abuse therapy clinic run by Key McFarlane. The interviewing techniques used during investigations of the allegations were highly suggestive and invited children to pretend or speculate about supposed events. By spring of 1984, it was claimed that 360 children had been abused. Astrid Heppenstall-Heger performed medical examinations and took photos of what she believed to be minute scarring, which she stated was caused by anal penetration. Journalist John Earl believed that her findings were based on unsubstantiated medical histories. Later research demonstrated that the methods of questioning used on the children were extremely suggestive, leading to false accusations. Others believe that the questioning itself may have led to false memory syndrome among the children questioned. Only 41 of the original 360 children ultimately testified in the grand jury and pretrial hearings, and fewer than a dozen testified at the actual trials. Michael P. Maloney, a clinical psychologist and professor of psychiatry, reviewed videotapes of the children's interviews. Maloney, testifying as an expert witness on interviewing children, was highly critical of the techniques used, referring to them as improper, coercive, directive, problematic and adult-directed in a way that forced the children to follow a rigid script. He concluded that many of the kids' statements in the interviews were generated by the examiner. Transcripts and recordings of the interviews contained far more speech from adults than children and demonstrated that, despite the highly coercive interviewing techniques used, initially the children were resistant to interviewers' attempts to elicit disclosures. The recordings of the interviews were instrumental in the jury's refusal to convict, by demonstrating how children could be coerced to giving vivid and dramatic testimonies without having experienced actual abuse. The techniques used were shown to be contrary to the existing guidelines in California for the investigation of cases involving children and child witnesses. Some of the accusations were described as bizarre, overlapping with accusations that mirrored the emerging satanic ritual abuse panic. It was alleged that, in addition to having been sexually abused, they saw witches fly, traveled in a hot air balloon, and were taken through underground tunnels. When shown a series of photographs by Danny Davis, the McMartin's lawyer, one child identified actor Chuck Norris as one of the abusers. Some of the abuse was alleged to have occurred in secret tunnels beneath the school. Several excavations turned up evidence of old buildings on the site and other debris from before the school was built, but no evidence of any secret chambers or tunnels was found. There were claims of orgies at car washes and airports, and of children being flushed down toilets to secret rooms where they would be abused, then cleaned up and presented back to their parents. Some child interviewees talked of a game called Naked Movie Star and suggested they were forcibly photographed nude. During trial testimony, some children stated that the Naked Movie Star game was actually a rhyming taunt used to tease other children. What you say is what you are, you're a naked movie star, and had nothing to do with having naked pictures taken. Judy Johnson, who made the initial allegations, made bizarre and impossible statements about Raymond Buckey, including that he could fly. Though the prosecution asserted Johnson's mental illness was caused by the events of the trial, Johnson had admitted to them that she was mentally ill beforehand. Evidence of Johnson's mental illness was withheld from the defense for 3 years and, when provided, was in the form of sanitized reports that excluded Johnson's statements, at the order of the prosecution. One of the original prosecutors, Glenn Stevens, left the case in protest and stated that other prosecutors had withheld evidence from the defense, including the information that Johnson's son did not actually identify Ray Buckey in a series of photographs. Stevens also accused Robert Filibosian, the deputy district attorney on the case, of lying and withholding evidence from the court and defense lawyers in order to keep the Buckeys in jail and prevent access to exonerating evidence. 2 trials were conducted for the McMartin preschool case. The first lasted from July 13, 1987, to January 18, 1990, while the second lasted from May 7, 1990, to July 27, 1990. Arrests and preliminary hearing. On March 22, 1984, Virginia McMartin, Peggy McMartin Buckey, Ray Buckey, Ray's sister Peggy Ann Buckey, and teachers Mary Ann Jackson, Betty Rader, and Babette Spittler were charged with 115 counts of child abuse, later expanded to 321 counts of child abuse involving 48 children. In the 20 months of preliminary hearings, the prosecution, led by attorney Lael Rubin, presented their theory of sexual abuse. The children's testimony during the preliminary hearings was inconsistent. Michelle Smith and Lawrence Pazder, co-authors of the now discredited Satanic Ritual Abuse autobiography Michelle Remembers, met with the parents and children involved in the case, and were believed by the initial prosecutor Glenn Stevens to have influenced the children's testimony. In 1986, a new district attorney, Ira Reiner, called the evidence incredibly weak and dropped all charges against Virginia McMartin, Peggy Ann Buckey, Mary Ann Jackson, Betty Rader, and Babette Spittler. Peggy McMartin Buckey and Ray Buckey remained in custody awaiting trial. Peggy McMartin's bail had been set at $1 million and Ray Buckey had been denied bail. First trial edit. The first trial opened on July 13, 1987. During the trial, the prosecution presented 7 medical witnesses. The defense attempted to rebut them with several witnesses, but the judge limited them to one to save time. In their summation, the prosecution argued that they had 7 experts on this issue, when the defense only had 1. In 1989, Peggy Ann Bucky's appeal to have her teaching credentials reinstated after their suspension was granted. The judge ruled that there was no credible evidence or corroboration to lead to the license being suspended, and that a review of the videotaped interviews with McMartin children revealed a pronounced absence of any evidence implicating Peggy Ann in any wrongdoing and raises additional doubts of credibility with respect to the children interviewed or with respect to the value of CII interviewing techniques themselves. The following day, the State Credentialing Board in Sacramento endorsed the ruling and restored Bucky's right to teach. Perjury by confession witness. In October 1987, jailhouse informant George Freeman was called as a witness and testified that Ray Bucky had confessed to him while sharing a cell. Freeman later attempted to flee the country and confessed to perjury in a series of other criminal cases in which he manufactured testimony in exchange for favorable treatment by the prosecution, in several instances fabricating jailhouse confessions of other inmates. To guarantee his testimony during the McMartin case, Freeman was given immunity to previous charges of perjury.
Does that sound like
Acquittals. On January 18, 1990, after 3 years of testimony and 9 weeks of deliberation by the jury, Peggy McMartin Bucky was acquitted on all counts. 11 Ray Bucky was cleared on 52 of 65 counts, and freed on bail after more than 5 years in jail. 9 of 11 jurors at a press conference following the trial stated that they believed the children had been molested, but the evidence did not allow them to state who had committed the abuse beyond a reasonable doubt. 11 out of the 13 jurors who remained by the end of the trial voted to acquit Bucky of the charges. The refusal of the remaining 2 to vote for a not guilty verdict resulted in the deadlock. The media overwhelmingly focused on the 2 jurors who voted guilty at the expense of those who believed Bucky was not guilty. Second trial and dismissal. Ray Bucky was retried later on 6 of the 13 counts of which he was not acquitted in the first trial. The second trial opened on May 7, 1990, and resulted in another hung jury on July 27, 1990. The prosecution then gave up trying to obtain a conviction, and the case was closed with all charges against Ray Bucky dismissed. He had been jailed for 5 years without ever being convicted of committing any crime.
Wow.
Media coverage. In 1988, the New York Times reported that the case attracted national attention when the authorities speculated that hundreds of children might have been molested and subjected to satanic rituals and has teetered on the brink of mistrial. The media coverage was generally skewed towards an uncritical acceptance of the prosecution's viewpoint. David Shaw of the Los Angeles Times wrote a series of articles, which later won the Pulitzer Prize, discussing the flawed and skewed coverage presented by his own paper on the trial. It was only after the case that coverage of the flaws in the evidence and events presented by witnesses and the prosecution were discussed. Wayne Satz, at the time a reporter for the Los Angeles ABC affiliate television station KABC, reported on the case and the children's allegations. He presented an unchallenged view of the children's and parents' claims. Satz later entered into a romantic relationship with Key McFarlane, the social worker at the Children's Institute International, who was interviewing the children. Another instance of media conflict of interest occurred when David Rosenzweig, the editor at the Los Angeles Times overseeing the coverage, became engaged to Mary Lael Rubin, the prosecutor. Legacy edit. The case lasted 7 years and cost $15 million, the longest and most expensive criminal case in the history of the United States legal system, and ultimately resulted in no convictions. The McMartin preschool was closed and the building was dismantled. In 2005, one of the children, as an adult, retracted the allegations of abuse. Never did anyone do anything to me, and I never saw them doing anything. I said a lot of things that didn't happen. I lied. Anytime I would give them an answer that they didn't like, they would ask again and encourage me to give them the answer they were looking for. I felt uncomfortable and a little ashamed that I was being dishonest. But at the same time, being the type of person I was, whatever my parents wanted me to do, I would do. In The Devil in the Nursery, Margaret Talbot for the New York Times summarized the case. When you once believed something that now strikes you as absurd, even unhinged, it can be almost impossible to summon that feeling of credulity again. Maybe that is why it is easier for most of us to forget, rather than to try and explain, the satanic abuse scare that gripped this country in the early 80s, the myth that devil worshippers had set up shop in our daycare centers, where their clever adepts were raping and sodomizing children, practicing ritual sacrifice, shedding their clothes, drinking blood, and eating feces, all unnoticed by parents, neighbors, and the authorities. Mary A. Fisher in an article in Los Angeles Magazine said the case was simply invented, and transmogrified into a national cause célèbre by the misplaced zeal of 6 people: Judy Johnson, a seriously mentally ill mother who died of alcoholism; Jane Hogue, the detective who investigated the complaints; Key McFarlane, the social worker who interviewed the children; Robert Filibosian, the district attorney who was in a losing battle for re-election; Wayne Satz, the television reporter who first reported the case; and Lael Rubin, the prosecutor. In 1990, Peggy, Ray, and Peggy Ann Buckey spoke to the National Association of State Vocal Organizations about their experiences. Peggy Ann and Ray Buckey attended the 1997 Day of Contrition Conference in Salem, Massachusetts. They were joined by other victims and experts of the daycare sex abuse hysteria. Legal. In many states, laws were passed allowing children to testify on closed-circuit TV so the children would not be traumatized by facing the accused. The arrangement was supported in Maryland v. Craig, in which the United States Supreme Court ruled that closed-circuit testimony was permissible where it was limited to circumstances with a likelihood that a minor may be harmed by testifying in open court. The case also influenced how very young children were questioned for evidence in court cases with concerns over their capacity for suggestibility and false memories. The case and others like it also affected the investigation of allegations by young children. Normal police procedure is to record using video, tape, or notes in interviews with alleged victims. The initial interviews with children by the CII were recorded, and demonstrated to the jury members in the trial the coercive and suggestive techniques used by CII staff to produce allegations. These interviews were instrumental in the jury members failing to produce a guilty verdict against Buckey, and several similar trials with similar interviewing techniques produced similar not guilty verdicts when juries were allowed to view the recordings. In response, prosecutors and investigators began abandoning their tape recorders and notepads, and a manual was produced for investigating child abuse cases that urged prosecutors and investigators not to record their interviews. Continued allegations of secret tunnels. Edit. In 1990, parents who believed their children had been abused at the preschool hired archaeologist E. Gary Stickle to investigate the site. In May 1990, Stickle claimed he found evidence of tunnels, consistent with the children's accounts, under the McMartin preschool using ground-penetrating radar. Others have disagreed with Stickle's conclusions. John Earl wrote in 1995 that the concrete slab floor was undisturbed except for a small patch where the sewer line was tapped into. Once the slab was removed, there was no sign of any materials to line or hold up any tunnels, and the concrete floor would have made it impossible for the defendants to fill in any tunnels once the abuse investigation began. The article concluded that disturbed soil under the slab was from the sewer line and construction fill buried under the slab before it was poured. Further, Earl noted that some fill from beneath the concrete slab was dated to the year 1940. W. Joseph Wyatt's 2002 report concluded that the so-called tunnels under the preschool were more plausibly explained as a series of adjacent rubbish pits used by the owners of the site before the preschool's construction in 1966. Materials found during the excavation included bottles predominantly dated to the 1930s and 40s, as well as tin can fragments, plywood, inner tubes, professionally butchered livestock bones, 4 small containers of trash, as well as the former owner's old mailbox. Only 3 small items found near the edge of the concrete slab were dated after 1966. Wyatt suggested one of these, a fragment of a plastic snack bag, was most likely dragged into the pit by rats or other scavengers, just as Stickle himself had suggested likely happened for other debris that didn't fit his tunnel theory. The remaining items, per Wyatt, had likely been left by a plumber digging from adjacent to the building to avoid damaging the concrete pad. Moreover, Wyatt speculated that Stickles' conclusions were colored by his collaboration with the parents of the McMartin children. Effects on child abuse research. Shortly after investigation into the McMartin charges began, the funds to research child sexual abuse greatly increased, notably through the budget allocated for the National Center on Child Abuse and Neglect, NCAN. The agency's budget increased from $1.8 million to $7.2 million between 1983 and 1984, increasing to $15 million in 1985, making it the greatest source of funding for child abuse and neglect prevention in the United States. The majority of this budget went towards studies on sexual abuse, with only $5 million going towards physical abuse and neglect. Federal funding was also used to arrange conferences on ritual abuse, providing an aura of respectability as well as allowing prosecutors to exchange tips on the best means of obtaining convictions. A portion of the funds were used to publish the book Behind the Playground Walls, which used a sample of children drawn from the McMartin families. The book claimed to study the effects of reported rather than actual abuse, but portrayed all of the McMartin children as actual victims of abuse despite a lack of convictions during the trials and without mentioning questions about the reality of the accusations. Another grant of $173,000 went to David Finkelhor, who used the funds to investigate allegations of daycare sexual abuse throughout the country, combining the study of verified crimes by admitted pedophiles and unverified accusations of satanic ritual abuse. Acquittals. On January 18, 1990, after 3 years of testimony and 9 weeks of deliberation by the jury, Peggy McMartin Bucky was acquitted on all counts. Ray Bucky was cleared on 52 of 65 counts, and freed on bail after more than 5 years in jail. What happened to the McMartin defendants? The trial dragged on for nearly 3 years. The CII investigation methods, such as its suggestive and leading questions to children and its use of dolls, would eventually be discredited. In the end, Ray Bucky and Peggy Bucky were acquitted. 1 allegations against a single teacher set off a groundswell. In 1983, a 39-year-old mother named Judy Johnson reportedly claimed that her 2-year-old son complained about painful bowel movements, after which she found blood in his diaper. Johnson allegedly said her son told her that Ray Bucky, one of his teachers at the McMartin preschool, had sodomized him. Johnson reportedly contacted police and further alleged that Bucky had dressed her son in women's clothes and played doctor with him. In addition, she allegedly said she heard still more claims of abuse involving other children. Authorities then launched a massive investigation into the McMartin preschool. The school was founded in 1966 by Virginia McMartin. No claims of misconduct at the McMartin preschool had ever been brought to the police prior to Johnson's. Ray Bucky was Virginia's 25-year-old grandson. In 1983, he worked at the school under the management of his mother, Peggy McMartin Bucky, who had taken over the operation from her own mother. Police reportedly sent a letter home to parents of McMartin preschool students stating that Bucky had been arrested on suspicion of committing crimes against their children. Among the allegations mentioned were oral sex, fondling of genitals, buttock or chest area, and sodomy, possibly committed under the pretense of taking the child's temperature. The police note also indicated that Bucky might have used their kids to create child pornography. Understandably, panic reportedly set in among the letter's recipients. It would only intensify as allegations increased in both the number of victims and the severity of the alleged abuse. People. 2 bizarre claims regarding satanic orgies, grave robbing and sex tunnels. Authorities reportedly interviewed more than 400 children connected to the McMartin preschool abuse claims. In the course of the investigation, media outlets reported an array of startlingly strange allegations attributed to the children. Among the abuse-related claims were: Ray Bucky flew in the classroom, took 1 child to meet a goat man, and took another child to a house where he let lions roam free. Animal sacrifices were committed involving a horse, rabbits, and other classroom pets. A series of tunnels under the school were connected to secret chambers for sex rituals and other abuse. Teachers and students visited a cemetery to dig up bodies. Teachers took children to orgies at a car wash and an airport. Children were flushed down toilets to sewer rooms for abuse. Children were transported to off-site abuse locations via hot air balloon. One child identified Hollywood actor Chuck Norris from a photograph, claiming he had been present for some of the abuse. Regardless of the seemingly impossible nature of many of these claims, detectives reportedly took some of them seriously enough to warrant full investigations. In respect to the tunnels, for example, authorities reportedly excavated the schoolyard but found only a series of plywood boxes that the children allegedly crawled through during playtime. Overall, in response to the children's reported allegations, authorities are said to have searched 37 cars, 11 residences, 7 businesses, 3 churches, 2 airports, and a farm, only to come away with no physical evidence. Still, charges were filed and convictions were pursued. Crime Library. 3. Controversy over interviewing children and possibly implanted memories. While a rallying cry of "We believe the children" became popularly associated with the McMartin investigation, it was later revealed that law enforcement officials and therapists allegedly used interview techniques on the children that many critics later described as manipulative or even coercive. The district attorney's office reportedly consulted with Children's Institute International, an organization said to be dedicated to helping abused children, to help with getting the kids to talk about the alleged abuses. Key McFarlane, a social worker with the institute described by some as an unlicensed therapist, reportedly conducted many interviews by using controversial techniques that involved puppets, stuffed animals, and anatomically correct dolls. She allegedly told the kids she wanted them to share yucky secrets. According to the 2017 book We Believe the Children, A Moral Panic in the 1980s by investigative journalist Richard Beck, when one boy said he had never seen the supposed child porn game Naked Movie Star being played at the school, McFarlane used a puppet to respond, "Well, what good are you?" and, later, "You must be dumb."
What?
The book also alleges that when another 5-year-old boy denied ever being abused or seeing abuse, McFarlane told him, "You're just a scaredy cat." In addition, Beck writes that police interviews were also crafted to get the answers that law enforcement wanted, with one detective reportedly saying to a child, "Did he take your underpants off? Can you say yes? Say yes." Daily Beast.
Wow.
For more than 6 years of investigations and multiple trials led to no convictions. Eventually, authorities reportedly filed more than 100 charges of child abuse against 7 staff members from the McMartin preschool: Virginia McMartin, Ray Buckey, Peggy McMartin Buckey, Peggy Ann Buckey, Mary Ann Jackson, Babette Spittler, and Betty Rader. The trials commenced in 1987 and went on for 3 years. On January 18, 1990, a jury acquitted the defendants on 52 counts, but jurors were reportedly split over 13 other charges, allegedly claiming that they seemed true, but that prosecutors hadn't successfully proven them beyond a shadow of a doubt. After the other defendants were let go, Ray Buckey was retried in 1990, which resulted in another hung jury. The judge declared a mistrial and set Buckey free. At that point, Buckey had reportedly spent 5 years in jail over crimes for which he was never convicted and with which he was never charged again. In 1991, 3 McMartin defendants, Virginia McMartin, Peggy McMartin Buckey, and Peggy Ann Buckey, filed a defamation suit against one parent who had stated on TV that they committed satanic sex crimes against children. The women ultimately won the case, but the judge awarded them $1 apiece in damages.
Wow,
New York
$1?
Times. 5. The McMartin preschool trial has since come to be viewed as part of a larger satanic panic. While the charges of Satan worship and occult rituals stood out among the allegations made against the McMartin preschool staff, such details were not uncommon during a great deal of sensationalistic crime reporting of the era. In fact, it ultimately played into what has come to be called the 1980s satanic panic, in which true crime, horror fiction, frightened flights of fantasy, and popular culture all seemed to collide into a strange societal pile-up. Other high-profile elements of the satanic panic are said to have included the crimes and capture of Night Stalker serial killer Richard Ramirez, The Say You Love Satan murder on Long Island in 1984, Tipper Gore spearheading the Parents Music Resource Center hearings in Congress to decry heavy metal music in 1985, and Geraldo Rivera's live NBC Halloween special, Devil Worship, exposing Satan's underground in 1988. More specifically, the McMartin preschool trial reportedly led to an explosion of ritual abuse allegations against teachers and other school workers that ultimately proved to be unfounded. As examples, the New York Times cites the case of Margaret Kelly Michaels, a nursery school teacher arrested in 1988 for abusing children with forks and spoons and urinating in their mouths, despite a complete lack of physical evidence. It took 6 years for Michaels' conviction to be overturned. The Times also mentions Little Rascals Daycare in North Carolina where, in 1989, workers were arrested based on claims they had murdered babies and thrown children into pools filled with sharks. The defendants were initially found guilty but, in 1995, their convictions were overturned and all charges were dropped.
You heard that, right? So, this is what Attorney Jennifer Bonjean referenced was that case. And also now I'm going to play the other part of her tweet, which was the great fake child sex trafficking. Hold on. I'm going to play that and just for informational purposes.
Autumn presents The Children Are in Danger, written by Caitlin Tiffany. A poster in the window of Cahoot's Corner Cafe, great potatoes, good coffee, advertised a family event at the Oakdale, California rodeo grounds. There would be food trucks, carnival games, live music, a raffle, and the opportunity to support the cause of freeing child sex slaves. The event, called the Festival of Hope, was a fundraiser for the anti-child sex trafficking group Operation Underground Railroad, which was founded in Utah in 2013 and has achieved immense popularity on social media in the past year and a half, attracting an outsized share of attention during a new wave of concern about imperiled children. It is beloved by parenting groups on Facebook, lifestyle influencers on Instagram, and fitness guys on YouTube, who are impressed by its muscular approach to rescuing the innocent. The nonprofit group is known for taking part in overseas sting operations in which it ensnares alleged child sex traffickers. It also operates a CrossFit gym in Utah. Supporters commit to Shine Our Light, the middle word a reference to the group's acronym, and to Break the Chain, which refers to human bondage and to cycles of exploitation. Oakdale, a small city near Modesto, is set among ever-dwindling cattle ranches and ever-expanding almond farms. By 9:30 a.m. on a Saturday in late summer, more than 100 booths lined the perimeter of the rodeo arena. Vendors sold crepes and jerky and quilts and princess makeovers and cut-go knives. They paid a fee to participate, a portion of which went to OUR, as did the proceeds from raffle tickets. Miniature horses with purple dye on their tails were said to be unicorns. A man with a guitar played Free Fallin', and then a twangier song referring to alcohol as heartache medication, which was notable only because it was so incongruously depressing. Everyone else was enjoying a beautiful day in the Central Valley. The air was filled with the perfect scent of hot dogs and with much less wildfire smoke than there had been the day before. At the OUR information booth and merchandise tent, stickers and rubber break-the-chain bracelets were free, but snapback hats reading Find Gardy, a reference to a Haitian boy who was kidnapped in 2009, cost $30. Shelley Enos Forcapa had planned the day's event with help from 3 other Operation Underground Railroad volunteers, 2 of whom she had originally met through the local Parent-Teacher Association. She was wearing an official Festival of Hope benefiting Operation Underground Railroad t-shirt and earrings shaped like red X's, a symbol often paired with the anti-trafficking hashtag #EndIt movement. Oakdale has been so welcoming, Enos Forcapa told me. They're behind the cause. The women were busy dealing with festival logistics, but during a brief lull, another volunteer, Erica Gonzalez, drew me over to a corner of the tent to show me a video on her phone, which she thought might be called Death to Pedos, but wasn't. It was called Open Your Eyes, and Gonzalez pulled it up in the Telegram messaging app. From the time we were little kids, we revered the rich and famous, the voiceover began, as images of celebrities and of battered children flashed on the screen. As I started to take notes, she pulled the phone away and wondered aloud if she had done something she shouldn't have. I watched the rest of the video a few minutes later on my own phone. We are digital soldiers fighting the greatest war the world has never seen, the voiceover explained. The bad guys? Barack Obama, Ellen DeGeneres, Lady Gaga, Chuck Schumer, Tom Hanks, Oprah Winfrey, Hillary Clinton. The good guys? A much smaller team. Donald Trump, Ivanka Trump, Barron Trump, Jesus, and an unidentified soldier holding a baby swaddled in an American flag. And, by implication, me, the viewer. Our weapon is truth, the voiceover continued, as music swelled in the background. We'll never give up, even if we have to shake everyone awake one by one. The provenance of the video was unclear. It was not affiliated with Operation Underground Railroad and bore no resemblance to the official materials its volunteers had been handing out, but the term digital soldier rang a bell. It was a reference to a QAnon conspiracy theory that emerged in 2017 on an out-of-the-way message board and describes Donald Trump as a lone hero waging war against a deep state and a cabal of elites who are pedophiles and child murderers. These conspirators will soon be exposed and perhaps brutally executed during a promised storm. Notably, the video isn't asking for money, and it isn't presenting an argument. It's more like a daily devotional for people who already believe in its premise, or something like it. Anxiety about the nation's children, which is at a steady simmer in the best of times, boiled over in the summer of 2020, when the digital soldiers of QAnon occupied the otherwise innocuous hashtag #SaveTheChildren. Around the same time, major social media platforms had started blocking overt QAnon accounts and hashtags. From their new beachhead, the digital soldiers were able to disseminate a cascade of false information about child trafficking on Instagram and Facebook. Children were being trafficked on the hospital ship USNS Comfort, then docked in New York City and through tunnels underneath Central Park. As outrageous as these allegations were, their timing may have made them sound less fantastical to some. They coincided with the release of popular documentaries about the real sex trafficking crimes allegedly committed by Jeffrey Epstein, the disgraced financier who was arrested in July 2019 and committed suicide that August, and who was known for his wide circle of rich and famous acquaintances. His death had set off a new slew of conspiracy theories. In this context, the suddenly ubiquitous #SaveTheChildren posts created the illusion of an organic movement rising up to confront a massive social problem. Americans who knew little about QAnon became heavily involved, and when QAnon moved on to other concerns, a stolen election, a poisonous vaccine, these volunteers stayed devoted to the cause of opposing child sex trafficking. Today, buying a raffle ticket to support this effort feels as natural to many people as picking up a Livestrong bracelet at a car wash cash register did 15 years ago. Small businesses sponsor fundraisers. Happy couples add Operation Underground Railroad donation links to their online wedding registries. All over the country, community volunteers promote awareness of child sex trafficking. In Colorado, at a Kentucky Derby party, In Arkansas at an Easter bake sale, in Texas at a big-ass crawfish bash, in Idaho at a Thanksgiving morning turkey run, in Utah at an annual winter holiday fair. In some ways, this is just the most recent expression of a fear that has been part of the American landscape since the early 20th century, roughly the moment, as the sociologist Viviana Zelizer has argued, when children came to be viewed as economically useless but emotionally priceless. As in previous moral panics, messages about the threat of child sex trafficking are spread by means of friendly chit-chat, flyers in the windows of diners, and coverage on local TV news. But the present panic is different in one important respect. It is sustained by the social web. On Facebook and Instagram, friends and neighbors share unsettling statistics and dire images in formats designed for online communities that reward displays of concern. Because today's messaging about child sex trafficking is so decentralized and fluid, it is impervious to gatekeepers who would knock down its most outlandish claims. The phenomenon suggests the possibility of a new law of social media physics. A panic in motion can stay in motion. Pedophiles can be anyone, Laura Pomation, at the time a Palm Beach-based volunteer team leader for Operation Underground Railroad, wrote on Facebook in June. They look just like you and me. They work with us. They sit next to us at our favorite restaurant. They are shopping with us at the grocery store. To raise awareness and funds for Operation Underground Railroad, Pomation helped organize a statewide motorcycling event. It's about saving children who are being raped and abused by pedophiles 10, 20, 30 times a day, she wrote. And I don't say that to sensationalize the topic. I say it because it's true and it's happening and no one is talking about it. Her volunteer chapter claimed that upwards of 300,000 children are victims of sex trafficking in the United States every year. All over the country, well-meaning Americans are convinced that human trafficking, and specifically child sex trafficking, is happening right in their backyard, or at any rate, no farther away than the nearest mall parking lot. A 2020 survey by the political scientists Joseph Uzinski and Adam Enders found that 35% of Americans think the number of children who are victims of trafficking each year is about 300,000 or higher. 24% think it is much higher. Online, people read that trafficking is a problem nobody else is willing to discuss. The city they live in is a hotspot, their state one of the worst in the country. Despite what the mainstream media are saying, this is the real pandemic. Of course, child sex trafficking does happen, and it is horrible. The crime is a serious concern of human rights organizations and of governments all over the world. Statistically, however, it is hard to get a handle on. The data are often misleading, when they exist at all. Whatever the incidence, sex trafficking does not involve Tom Hanks or hundreds of thousands of American children. When today's activists talk about the problem of trafficking, knowing exactly what they're referring to can be difficult. They cite statistics that actually offer global estimates of all forms of labor trafficking. Or they mention outdated and hard-to-parse figures about the number of children who go missing in the United States every year, most of whom are never in any immediate danger, and then start talking about children who are abducted by strangers and sold into sex slavery. While stereotypical kidnappings, what you picture when you hear the word, do occur, the annual number hovers around 100. Sex trafficking also occurs in the United States. The U.S. National Human Trafficking Hotline has been operated by the anti-trafficking nonprofit Polaris Project and overseen and partially funded by the Department of Health and Human Services since 2007. In 2019, it recorded direct contacts with 14,597 likely victims of sex trafficking of all ages. The average age at which these likely victims were first trafficked, age of entry as the statistic is called, was 17. The organization itself doesn't regard its figure for direct contacts as one that should be used with too much confidence. It is probably low, but no more solid data exist. There is a widely circulated number, and it's even bigger than the one Laura Pomation and her volunteer chapter publicized. 800,000 children go missing in the U.S. every year. The figure shows up on T-shirts and handmade posters and in the captions of Instagram posts. But the number doesn't mean what the people sharing it think it means. It comes from a study conducted in 1999 by the Justice Department, and it's an estimate of the number of children who were reported missing over the period of a year for any reason and for any length of time. The majority were runaways, children caught up in custody disputes, or children who were temporarily not where their guardians expected them to be. The estimate for non-family abductions reported to authorities was 12,100, which includes stereotypical kidnappings, but came with the caveat that it was extrapolated from an extremely small sample of cases, and as a result, its precision and confidence interval are unreliable. Later in the report, the authors noted that only a fraction of 1% of the children who were reported missing had not been recovered by the time they were counted for the study. The authors also clarified that a survey sent to law enforcement agencies found that an estimated 115 of the non-family abducted children were victims of stereotypical kidnapping. The Justice Department repeated the study in 2013 and found that reports of missing children had significantly decreased. Plenty of news outlets have pointed out how misleading the 800,000 figure is, yet it has been resilient. It appeared on colorful handmade posters at hundreds of Save the Children marches that began taking place in the summer of 2020, many of which were covered credulously by local TV news. Narrating footage of a march in Peoria, Illinois, a reporter for the CBS affiliate WMBD did not mention the QAnon hashtags on some of the signs and passed along without comment information from the organizer, Brenna Fort. Fort says her research shows that at least 800,000 children go missing every year. The segment ended by zooming in on a plastic baby doll wearing a cloth diaper on which someone had written "Not for sale" in red marker. The last moral panic centered on widespread physical dangers to America's children began in the early 1980s. Several high-profile and disturbing stories became media spectacles, including the 1981 murder and then beheading of 6-year-old Adam Walsh, who was abducted from a Sears department store in Hollywood, Florida. The Adam Walsh story was made into a TV movie that aired on NBC in October 1983, the same year that the 1979 disappearance of 6-year-old Aton Pates was fictionalized in the theatrically released movie Without a Trace. Adam's father, John Walsh, who later spent more than 2 decades as the host of America's Most Wanted, claimed that 50,000 children were abducted for reasons of foul play in the United States every year. He warned a Senate subcommittee in 1983, "This country is littered with mutilated, decapitated, raped, strangled children." In response, Congress passed 2 laws, establishing a nationwide hotline and creating the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The panic prompted the building of shopping mall kiosks where parents could fingerprint or videotape their children to make them easier for police to identify. According to the sociologist David Altidy, it also led to the advertising of dental identification implants for people who did not yet have their permanent teeth, as well as the creation of a cottage industry of missing child insurance to cover the cost of private detectives in the event of an abduction. As a 1986 story in The Atlantic recounted, the nonprofit National Child Safety Council printed photos of missing children on 3 billion milk cartons. A person would have had to be paying close attention to notice that all the photos were of the same 106 faces. The photos also appeared on grocery bags, Coca-Cola bottles, throw-away toll tickets, and pizza boxes. Ordinary citizens may have encountered explicit reminders of missing children more often than for any other social problem. The sociologist Joel Best wrote in 1987, "The fear of stranger abduction was partly a product of the cultural environment at the time. Family values, political rhetoric, drove paranoia about the drug trade, pornography, and crime. Second-wave feminism had encouraged more women to enter the workforce, though not without societal pressure to feel guilt and anxiety about leaving their children at home alone or in the care of strangers. The divorce rate was rising, and custody battles were becoming more common, leading to the complicated legal situation of family abduction, or child snatching. Yet there was still a backstop, a way for the panic to end. The Denver Post won a Pulitzer Prize for its 1985 story laboriously debunking the statistics that had caused such widespread alarm. The actual number of children kidnapped by strangers, according to FBI documentation, turned out to be 67 in 1983, up from 49 in 1982. A two-part PBS special explained the statistics and addressed the role that made-for-TV movies and media coverage had played in stoking the fire. A study conducted in 1987 by Al-Qaeda and the crime analyst Noah Fritz found that 3/4 of viewers who had previously considered missing children a serious problem changed their minds immediately after watching it. With the arrival of better information, the missing children panic faded. But decades later, fears have flared again. You know how they used to have the kids on the milk cartons way back in the day? J.C. Hansen, a Utah-based mother of 4 who sells Operation Underground Railroad and Save Our Children decals on Etsy, asked me in July. That wouldn't even be a possibility now because there's so many kids. There's not enough milk cartons to put them on. The government can control a vaccine and a virus, but they can't control this. Ashley Victoria, a 6th-grade teacher and designer of rhinestone-covered denim jackets, told me at her booth at the Oakdale Festival. The powerful are failing, or the powerful don't care, or the powerful are part of it all, she suggested. I am a conspiracy theorist, she went on, before referencing persistent internet rumors of Hillary Clinton's involvement in sex crimes committed by Jeffrey Epstein. I'm not going to sit here and say it's all true, but it's going to come out somehow. As I looked over a display of hoop earrings decorated with giant pom-poms at a neighboring booth, Victoria chatted with their maker about the supposedly suspicious deaths of the celebrity chef Anthony Bourdain, the fashion designer Kate Spade, and the DJ Avicii. They were trying to expose Hollywood, and they all committed suicide, she said. Mm-hmm. The earring designer promised to send Victoria a copy of the 10-part documentary, The Fall of the Cabal, which is full of QAnon-related theories and has been scrubbed from social media and video hosting platforms, but still circulates in group chats and Telegram channels. The conversation then turned to a popular conspiracy theory about the online home goods retailer Wayfair, which had spread across social media in the summer of 2020. The two of them discussed it excitedly, the way a pair of friends might riff on an underrated TV show or a deep cut from a beloved album. Nobody talks about it anymore, the earring designer complained. Victoria countered that she had been talking about it just the other day. The Wayfair rumor they were referring to had taken flight in response to confusing listings on the retail site. Some throw pillows were priced absurdly high due to an error, while industrial-sized cabinets appeared overpriced to those with little knowledge of that market. On Twitter, some suggested that the listings were actually for the purchase of children. That notion that a major American corporation was selling children online, more or less in plain sight, was also discussed in conspiracy forums on Reddit, where it was subsumed into the broader QAnon mythology about a ravenous sex trafficking cabal. There is, of course, no truth to these claims, a Wayfair spokesperson said at the time. QAnon may have catalyzed the spread of the Wayfair speculations, but the story had independent sources of energy. It was passed along by mom influencers who might otherwise post about manicures or nutritional supplements. It was shared among circles of women marketing essential oils or specialty shampoos, and on Instagram, where friends happily reposted one another's well-designed stories or infographics. Many of these women, when I spoke with them, emphatically denied supporting QAnon, or even having a good understanding of what it was. J.C. Hansen, the Etsy seller, traced her interest in the child sex trafficking cause to the Wayfair theory, which she had come across mostly because she'd been stuck at home during the pandemic and was spending more of her day on social media. I have no idea if that's true, she said, but I do know that that went viral, and that was when I started to look into it a lot more. If I hadn't dove deeper into the whole Wayfair scandal last year, I probably wouldn't have understood how big of a problem child sex trafficking actually is. While Hansen acknowledges that the coronavirus is a serious issue, child sex trafficking around the world seems at least equally serious to her, and she doesn't feel that it's receiving adequate attention from the media. I want to hear as much about that as I do about people dying of COVID, she said. Yet the panic and the pandemic are inextricably intertwined. Rumors of child sex trafficking shot across the internet during the months when pandemic shutdown measures were first implemented, a time when parents and children alike found themselves with more opportunities for idle digital browsing and emotion-led sharing. Referring to the dangers of kids being out of school and chattering online all day, Operation Underground Railroad's founder and president, Tim Ballard, has regularly described this period as a pedophile's dream and claimed that predators were thinking of it as harvest time. The threat of trafficking became a pet cause for anti-vaccine groups that recruit by exploiting every kind of parental concern. As a Florida state senator noted in August 2020, some in the anti-mask movement falsely claim that wearing a mask increases the risk of kidnapping and child sex trafficking. The new panic also provided an alternative to the Black Lives Matter protests happening around the country last summer, for those who may not have been sympathetic to that movement or its methods. One Facebook graphic showed the phrase, defund the police, altered to read, defend the children. More recently, the panic has intersected with paranoia about immigration and the increase of migrants at the southern border, echoing arguments that a wall between the United States and Mexico would be a humanitarian effort to prevent child trafficking. Though social media platforms have made significant progress in removing QAnon from spaces where a well-intentioned person might stumble across it, disproportionate concern about child trafficking has already been absorbed and normalized, sustained by shocking rumors on social platforms. Were children being trafficked on the Walmart app? Were they suffering, hidden on the container ship Ever Given, stuck in the Suez Canal? And by word of mouth among circles of trust. This past August in Magnolia, Texas, a suburb northwest of Houston, Tisha Butler and her family celebrated back-to-school season with a chili cook-off to benefit Operation Underground Railroad, hosted in the front yard of the martial arts school they own and operate. Butler conducts women's self-defense workshops every Saturday and invites survivors of domestic violence to take private lessons for free. I've worked with survivors of trafficking, she told me. It's very empowering for someone that survived something like that to learn the skills to protect yourself. The chili cook-off teams were mostly local business owners or the parents of students at the dojo. One was a group of moms who had started taking their kids to Taekwondo. Some of them had learned about OUR through Butler and were willing to support the cause because of their belief in her as a person who genuinely cares about helping children and women stay safe. We always think, oh, it's not me. I live in a good neighborhood. I come from a safe area. But it happens every day, Butler told me, sitting in her office after a secret round of voting to determine the winner of the cook-off. If you're not aware, then you are a prime target. Like many other volunteers, Butler brought up her own children when discussing her interest in the child sex trafficking cause. Having daughters, imagining them being forced to have sex with 10 to 50 people a day, it's sickening. Amid normal conversations about an understandable worry, startling pieces of misinformation can appear without warning. In July, I attended a benefit motorcycle ride in Clearwater, Florida, organized with the help of a women's biker group called the Diva Angels. The members meet weekly at a Quaker Steak and Lube, in part to raise awareness about the charity group rides. Rebecca Hoagland, a Diva Angel and an OUR supporter, talked with me straightforwardly about her long-standing concern for her son and daughter, and now her 2 granddaughters. She'd raised her kids to understand that she'd support them if they spoke up about an adult who was making them uncomfortable, and she wants to help make the state of Florida a better place. One of the biggest things that's going on right now, she also told me, is the organ harvesting. Children's organs. They'll take them and feed them and take care of them and raise them for their organs. The reliance of the present panic on social media suggests a largely leaderless phenomenon. But Operation Underground Railroad has won out as a favorite of the new activists and serves as an authority, a common reference point, and a center of gravity. The group was founded by Ballard almost a decade ago, well before the crescendo of interest in child trafficking. In his early career, Ballard says, he spent a short time working for the CIA, then 11 years as an undercover operator and special agent for the Department of Homeland Security, partly as a member of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. Spokespeople for the CIA and DHS said they could not confirm Ballard's employment record without his written permission, which he did not provide. Ballard has frequently explained that he became frustrated with the limitations of American legal jurisdiction and decided to strike out on his own. Operation Underground Railroad would not be confused for a government operation. It quickly made its name conducting sting operations overseas in which Ballard or a colleague posed, often hammily, as an American pedophile. The team coordinated with local law enforcement, then contacted suspected traffickers, arranged a meeting, and lay in wait. When the marks arrived and accepted payment, law enforcement stormed in and arrested the suspects. The entire episode was generally captured on film, and much of the footage has been posted on YouTube or has appeared in feature-length documentaries. In its early years, the group was known for inviting minor celebrities, including The Walking Dead star Laurie Holden, to participate in rescue operations. While no one doubts Ballard's enthusiasm for the work, critics have questioned the efficacy of OUR's raid and rescue approach, which was popularized in the 1990s by various anti-trafficking NGOs, notably the Christian nonprofit International Justice Mission. Trafficking experts note that, while dramatic, such operations fail to address the complex social and economic problems that create the conditions for trafficking. If the goal is to stamp out international child trafficking, they argue, the raids are of little value. As OUR's own footage demonstrates, the group's strategy involves asking targets to bring it the youngest children possible in exchange for large amounts of cash. In other words, potentially provoking the very behavior the group is ostensibly attempting to curb. In the United States, OUR does not conduct missions. It is careful to avoid coming off as a vigilante group, but it does donate money to police departments. The funds are earmarked for child trafficking-related resources, including dogs trained to sniff out hidden portable hard drives because they might contain child sex abuse material. But as Vice's Tim Marchman and Anna Merlin detailed in a recent investigation, police departments have not found OUR's contributions particularly useful. Many of the donations are insubstantial, and one state law enforcement agency told the reporters that the money wasn't worth the trouble of being associated with OUR. A more significant challenge to OUR's reputation, the district attorney of Davis County, Utah, opened a criminal investigation into the organization last year. According to a source close to the investigation, one focus of the probe is on potentially misleading statements made in OUR fundraising materials, including exaggerations about the group's involvement in arrests made by law enforcement. The Utah Attorney General's office, which had received $950,000 over 4 years from OUR for a wellness program for personnel in its Internet Crimes Against Children task force, cut all ties to the group when it learned of the Davis County investigation. An Operation Underground Railroad spokesperson declined to answer in detail a list of questions related to its record, and Ballard did not return requests for an interview. With respect to the ongoing Davis County investigation, the organization provided this response. OUR has not been asked to cooperate with any investigation regarding its business operations, but will do so if asked. Still, over the past year and a half, OUR has become the go-to organization to invoke when planning an awareness-raising golf tournament or bake sale or 10-mile truck pull. As John Walsh did in the 1980s, Ballard commands attention with graphic, emotional appeals. He peppers speeches with terms like child rape and pedophiles and bad guys, and apologizes for not apologizing for saying what he means. He is the author of several books, including one arguing that Abraham Lincoln was able to win the Civil War because he had read the Book of Mormon. Ballard is himself a Mormon. Fans regard him as an action hero, a real-life Batman, or a real-life Captain America. These are natural comparisons, because Ballard is charismatic and physically imposing. His extreme biceps, extreme blue eyes, and extreme bleach blonde hair represent a notable update of Walsh's furrowed brow and Joe Friday cadence. He's just a badass, Rondi Allred, a Utah mother of 5, told me. When I grow up, I want to be like Tim Ballard. Ballard is now a celebrity with a national fandom. In his capacity as OUR's founder, he was invited by President Trump to join a White House anti-trafficking advisory board. He has been the CEO of Glenn Beck's Nazarene Fund, which purports to rescue Christians and other religious minorities overseas from captivity and refugee camps. He has been befriended by the Pittsburgh Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin, who wrote the foreword for Ballard's 2018 book, Slave Stealers. OUR's annual fundraising has risen steadily with its founder's profile, from $6.8 million in 2016 to $21.2 million in 2019, the last year for which tax records are available. At the end of July, Ballard was the star of Operation Underground Railroad's second annual Rise Up for Children event, for which volunteer teams across the country organize marches and fundraisers. He spoke during a concert held in Lehi, Utah, which I watched via a live stream available on YouTube. The comment section quickly filled with heart and prayer hand emoji. On stage, he announced that OUR would soon be releasing another documentary about its rescue missions in Colombia, and then played the trailer, which was cut like an action thriller. Guns, beaches, boats, a crack of thunder, the puff of a cigar. There are people out there who would mock us and point at us. "Oh, you're just trying to be famous," Ballard said after it finished. those with other agendas that would put obstacles in our way to rescue children, which is absolutely insane to me. Ballard clearly relishes the role of the hero, and he cannily repays his followers for their admiration. Their participation in the cause is framed as itself heroic, even historic. At the Rise Up concert, Ballard explained to the audience that the abolitionist movement of the 19th century had been driven by people just like them. They got loud, then they got louder, then they got so loud that it reached the ears of leaders like President Abraham Lincoln. For a monthly $5 donation, OUR boosters can earn the designation abolitionist. Missing children are pointedly described as victims of modern-day slavery. This, too, seems to provide relief for supporters who may take issue with the Black Lives Matter movement, but still yearn to be on the right side of history. Another key to OUR's appeal is its capacious attitude toward truth. After the Wayfair conspiracy theory surfaced, dozens of anti-trafficking organizations signed an open letter stating that anybody, political committee, public office holder, candidate, or media outlet who lends any credibility to QAnon conspiracies related to human trafficking actively harms the fight against human trafficking. Operation Underground Railroad was conspicuously not among the signatories. Rather than dispel the Wayfair rumor, Ballard flirted with it. In July 2020, he posted an Instagram video in which he spoke directly to the camera while an American flag rippled behind his right shoulder. "Children are sold that way," he said. "For 17 years, I've worked as an undercover operator online. No question about it, children are sold on social media platforms, on websites, and so forth." The video has been viewed more than 2.7 million times.
Wow.
This August, a spokesperson for Operation Underground Railroad wrote in an email, "OUR does not condone conspiracy theories and is not affiliated with any conspiracy theory groups like QAnon in any way, shape, or form." Yet Ballard himself seems at home in this milieu. A forthcoming Ballard biopic, Sound of Freedom, will star Jim Caviezel, the actor who played Jesus in The Passion of the Christ. In the spring, Caviezel appeared at a health and freedom conference alongside various right-wing figures, including L. Lynn Wood, a lawyer and key architect of the 2020 election fraud conspiracy theories, and Mike Lindell, the MyPillow founder and a major Trump donor, who famously tried to pitch the former president on a COVID-19 miracle cure made from a highly poisonous shrub. Video of Caviezel's speech was shared by OUR supporters on YouTube and Facebook. In it, Caviezel told the audience that Ballard had planned to come with him for the interview, but was unable to attend because he was pulling kids out of the darkest recesses of hell right now. He then explained how adrenaline can be harvested from children's bodies as they scream and die. The sociologist Stanley Cohen coined the term moral panic in his 1972 book Folk Devils and Moral Panics. Cohen presented panics as intense but temporary, specifically as spasmodic. His interest in the phenomenon was piqued by an overreaction on the part of the British media to youth subcultures that favored motorcycle jackets and beachside fistfights. He posited that moral panics run out of steam because people get bored, or they go out of fashion, like a cut of pants or a type of salad, or it becomes clear that the instigators are crying wolf, or whatever they're saying is accepted as a fact that most people can live with. Yet even fleeting moral panics can have lasting consequences. The white slavery panic of the early 1900s led to the passage of the Mann Act, a law that criminalized transporting across state lines any woman or girl for the purpose of prostitution or debauchery. It was wielded against Black men who traveled with white women, and later against sex workers who were accused of trafficking themselves. The 1980s hysteria about child sex abuse preceded the Child Protection and Obscenity Enforcement Act, which made sharing child sex abuse material over a computer illegal, but also broadened the list of crimes for which the government could obtain wiretaps. Today, the difficult problem of child sex abuse material on the internet is being offered as a rationale for law enforcement to obtain backdoor access to encrypted communication, or for Congress to obligate social media companies to constantly surveil their users' posts and private messages. A panic can leave a mark even if it falls short of changing the law. Among other things, as Cohen wrote, it can change the way the society conceives itself. What does it mean that a diluted understanding of child trafficking is now the pet cause of the local florist and law firm and mortgage brokerage and foam insulation contractor? What does it mean if American communities are cleaved along a neat divide, separating those who see themselves as caring about the lives of children from those who, because they reject the conspiracy theories and inflated numbers, apparently do not? And what does it mean if a moral panic doesn't prove to be spasmodic? Cohen floated the idea of a permanent moral panic resting on a seamless web of social anxieties, then swatted down his own suggestion, pointing out that permanent panic is an oxymoron. Cohen died in 2013 and never had the opportunity to consider the way the internet gives each of us the power to take on work as champions of morality and marketers of fear. His analysis of prior panics can tell us only so much about what to expect from this one. I don't want to panic about a panic. Not all, or anywhere close to all, of the organizers or attendees of events like the Festival of Hope are invested in the issue of child sex trafficking because of sinister rumors they've heard or inflated statistics they've repeated. Many of them are expressing casual support for an obviously correct moral position, the same way you might buy a brownie to help homeless vets or drop a canned good in a collection box to help poor families. Most of the people I met were simply happy to support anything to do with kids or goodness in the world, which they seemed to feel was in short supply. They were warm and friendly, the kind of people you'd hope to have around if you got a flat tire or had a fainting spell. If there was a sentiment that almost everyone shared, it was that child trafficking is a disgusting problem at any scale, and that ignoring it speaks ill of us all. The undeniable truth of that statement points to another reason this panic may not soon recede. There are too many issues on which Americans can't agree, such as how or whether to manage a deadly pandemic, and how or whether to confront racism. But one type of justice isn't complicated, and one definition of freedom is clear. If children are disappearing from all over the country, how could we possibly think about anything else?
If you enjoyed this production, find the best long-form articles read aloud in the Autumn app. Available.
All right, guys. What do y'all think about these two? Well, the one article in that case. I want to put the link in here so see if anybody want to come in and have a conversation. Hold on. Let's see. I know I'm like trying to get your brains rattled today. I had a great time at the conference today, so yeah. I'll just put the link in. Hey, Ira. Anybody want to come in? And let me hear your input on what we just heard. Well, my opinion is the last article that I was just listening to is basically talking about how they're putting out false information to sensationalize the society. I mean, they're saying yes, there is sex trafficking and things like that, but the numbers are being skewed with false information because they gave him like saying that there was 800,000 cases when it's not that many. It's like around like 12,000 or something like that. So it's just like these organizations out there are basically playing on people's mind on that. Anybody want to come in? You're scared to talk? Or is this conversation too deep for tonight? Y'all want to go to sleep? Don't want your brains working tonight. Okay, guys, what do y'all think about the whole case? The case that you heard about. All right, y'all sleeping. Think I'm gonna let y'all go. Everybody sleeping? Ivan? Nobody's saying anything. We are the real supporters of R. Kelly. What happened, Michael? Hey, Michael. I didn't get a chance to say hello to everybody. Hi, everybody in the chat. Somebody saying we're not real supporters? I just see that Attorney Jennifer is working really hard. Cause okay, he's doing some investigation of some cases now, y'all. That's why I've been keeping an eye on her tweets to see some of the stuff that she's looking at. So I'm like, okay, let me go check this out. Let me go check this out. Let me go check that out. So she's working hard, y'all. She's working it hard. So whatever she posts, I'll be doing some little some research on it and seeing like, okay. So with the case of the McMartin case, a lot of similarities I see with Robert's case, like the coercion and getting them to, lie in a testimony, having the kids to lie. I mean, having little kids to lie in a testimony. And also like even him spending all that time in jail. He spent 5 years in jail, y'all. 5 years. Without even he was not offered bail. And he looks like he ended up having to go Like, from the time he got arrested, right, to the trial. Been a while since I've been in chat. I've been supporting. Thank you, Michael. So he's been a whole. There's a lot of similarities in the case, because even they were saying some videos, they didn't ever see any videos. They never could substantiate the claims that that lady was having. In fact, she ended up dying. Right, she ended up dying from her alcoholic intake, and she also had mental illness. And they covered her medical information. They didn't want to put that in there. And then you had all these other people doing some behind the back door dealings and having relationship and all this craziness that was going on in that case. And they also ruined the guy's life. They ruined that man's life. The daycare ended up closing, and they had, it was awful because the lady had some issues with her ex-husband. Wow. Isn't that terrible? Isn't that terrible? I know your brains are fried. Okay, I'm not going to get on this conversation. I'm going to end this live, and I'm going to take my butt to bed because it seems like nobody want to have a conversation about this kind of stuff tonight. I know it's kind of deep. So I'm going to end here, and I will talk to you guys mañana. You know me, I'm not stopping. I'm just checking. So just have to show you some like my little digging, because like whenever somebody puts something out, I want to know what they're talking about. I want to know what is it that she's seeing. So, and that's what I did. So and and then that article basically, I told you, it's just they pumping up the numbers to act like it's something that it's not that. It is sex trafficking cases, but they exaggerated the stuff. Inflated the numbers so they can get some financial backing for their organization. So anyway, I'm about to go. You guys have a wonderful night, and I am going to bed now. You guys, night, and see you later. Bye.